In the summer of 1940, in stores across Britain, men who had never been soldiers were handed rifles built in America for a war that had ended 22 years before. Roughly 615,000 M1917 Enfields were bought for the Home Guard, each with a red band painted around the stock. The band was there so nobody fed .303 into a .30-06 chamber. Roughly 75,000 Ross rifles went the same way. 58,983 Lewis guns were pulled out of storage, refurbished, and put back on the establishment. The oil came off, the wrapping came off, and the guns worked. That interval, packed away by one army, unwrapped by another, is longer than the entire service life of most weapons ever issued. Nothing sold new is designed for it. The men who wrote those specifications assumed the gun would be handled by conscripts, buried in mud, left in a barn, and issued again in a war they had not yet imagined. They wrote accordingly, receivers machined from solid forgings rather than folded out of stampings, lockups with a margin nobody has needed since sights graduated for distances no modern rifle is sighted for. But a second issue is not the same as a second war, and this list will not pretend otherwise. A rifle in a militia crate in 1940 and a rifle in a rifle company in 1940 are two different records. Presence is not endurance. Reissue is not strength. Everything near the top of this ranking has the engineering and the service and something left over on paper. Everything at the bottom survived on inventory. Number 3 belongs to a country that was never invaded, whose rifles never fired a shot at an enemy in either conflict, and spent 6 years in the hands of militiamen holding a border, and which still beats most modern factory bolt guns by measurement. Number 1 was the design a dozen nations had already copied before the war, that made its name had started. It is still in production, under its own name. Expensive rifles, sold as heritage. 25 guns, ranked by how far past the requirement they were built, and by what they actually did once the requirement expired. Let's count down from 25. Number 25, the Gewehr 88 Commission Rifle, adopted on the 12th of November 1888, and not a Mauser. It came from a German rifle testing commission assembled to answer France's smokeless Liebel, and Paul Mauser was deliberately excluded, by contemporary account, bitterly so. Something near 2.8 million were built to about 1899 at Danzig, Erfurt, and Spandau, and by Loewe, Haenel, and Steyr. Though the figures do not reconcile, machined steel receiver, split bridge, a separate rotating bolt head locking at the front, a ladder sight from 500 to 2,000 meters. The commission also sheathed the thin barrel in a sheet steel tube meant to float it for accuracy. The tube trapped water and rusted the barrels from the inside out. The first war it fought properly, German frontline issue until about 1915, then reserve and Allied hands, roughly 142,000, going to the Ottoman Empire. The second it spent behind the line, Police and Volkssturm issue in 1944 and 45, plus Polish, Yugoslav, and Turkish stocks, a breadth not firmly established. On the third question, it is silent. One published surplus test at 100 yards gave 3 to 5 inch groups, blamed on the sights rather than the action. It lasted because it sat in a storeroom. At least nobody rebored it and sent it forward as current. Number 24, the Vetterli-Vitali M1870/87/15. Italy did. The rifle began as an 1870 single shot by the Swiss engineer Johann Friedrich Vetterli. Took a 4-round box magazine from the Italian captain Giuseppe Vitali in 1887. From about July 1916, it was sleeved to 6.5 by 52 mm Carcano because the M91 could not be built fast enough for what the Isonzo was consuming. Roughly 700,000 were converted at Torino, Brescia, and Terni, among other works. This is where the word overbuilt breaks. The bolt locks on opposed lugs at the rear, a black powder arrangement with no margin in it, and the conversions depended on a barrel liner that was never perfectly anchored. American riflemen's assessment is that they should not be considered safe to shoot by modern standards. The first war it spent mostly in rear echelon and newly raised support units, though photographs from Caporetto in 1917 show the older 10.4 mm pattern in the line. The second was colonial and garrison work. Rifles stamped for Africa Orientale Italiana went to colonial police, Ascari units, and black-shirt paramilitaries, never to front-line Italian infantry, and the scale is poorly recorded. Presence is not endurance. Reissue is not strength. Number 23, the Berthier model 1907/15 and M16. France met the same arithmetic with a rifle designed for the shortage, rather than salvaged into it. André Berthier was a civilian engineer on the Algerian railways, not an ordnance officer, and his contribution was a Mannlicher en-bloc clip in a simplified Liebel action. Roughly 435,000 Meisel 1907/15 rifles were built. The 5-round Meisel 1916 rushed into production at Châtellerault from May 1917, ran past 800,000. The case is simplicity rather than strength. A 2-lug bolt with vertical lockup, fewer parts than the Lebel, an action contemporaries called smooth and easy to mass produce. Its open-bottomed magazine swallowed trench mud. The MLE 1916 covered it with a sprung trapdoor. Chasseurs carried it. Colonial regiments carried it. The Foreign Legion carried it, and so did Allied contingents, including African-American regiments under French command. It was still in French first and second line hands in 1940, and the Germans reissued captured stocks as the Gewehr 241 and the Karabiner 553 to occupation garrisons. Private Henry Johnson of the 369th Infantry, the Harlem Hellfighters, carried a Remington-made 1907/15 in the Argonne on the night of the 14th to 15th of May 1918. He fought off a German raiding party alone and took something like 21 wounds. A count that comes down through an auction description rather than a medical record. 2 genuine wars, honest construction, no claim on precision. Number 22, the Steyr-Mannlicher M1895. Simplicity was one answer to a war of volume. Austria-Hungary had bought the other one 20 years earlier and paid for the machining. Ferdinand Ritter von Mannlicher spent 18 years on the railways, rising to chief engineer of the Austrian Northern Railroad, and turned to firearms only after Königgrätz. Adopted in 1895 and built at Steyr and Budapest until 1918, his straight pull reached roughly 3.5 million. About 3/4 came from Steyr. The mechanism is the argument. Spiral ribs on the bolt body engage matching cuts in a separate rotating head, camming it into 2 forward lugs on a straight back-and-forth stroke instead of a quarter turn. 5-round en-bloc clip, 8 by 50 mm rimmed, and later 8 by 56. Flip-up sight to 2,600 paces. What that bought is disputed. Current references give anywhere from 20 to 35 aimed rounds a minute. No controlled test stands behind either figure. The Italians called it ta-pum for the crack that arrived ahead of its own bullet and made a trench song of it. What it did in the Second War is documented and second line throughout. Roughly 122,000 rebuilt to 7.92 by 57 mm in Yugoslavia and Greece, gendarmerie carbines, partisans and reservists, German police, and Volkssturm. Clever, durable, in both wars, and with no modern accuracy record whatever. Number 21, the Ross Rifle Mark III. The straight pull found one more champion in a country with no arms industry of its own. Sir Charles Ross was a Scottish baronet and big game shot who sold Canada on his design in 1901. Production to 1918 ran about 420,000. At least 235,540 were Mark III pattern. The Mark III does not lock on lugs. It locks with helical interrupted threads borrowed from artillery breech practice, reportedly holding near 150,000 pounds per square inch, roughly double a Lee Enfield's rating. The sights were the finest fitted to any service rifle of the period, graduated past 2,000 yards. It was the best target rifle in the world while it was failing in the field. Ross rifles swept Bisley from 1909 to 1913, the King's Prize among them. Then the mud at 2nd Ypres in April 1915. Threads fouled. Tight British .303 jam chambers. Men kicked their bolts. Open or took Lee Enfield's off British dead. Major T.V. Scudamore, captured there, wrote that his men would never forget being charged by the flower of the German army with nothing that would fire. Haig had it out of the Canadian divisions by July 1916, and its second war was rear area only. Roughly 75,000 to the Home Guard after Dunkirk. Issued in 2 wars, an infantry rifle in 1. Number 20, the Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. Ypres punished a weapon built to rifle range standards. The same war rewarded the opposite instinct. Browning's exposed hammer pump went commercial in November 1897 and reached France in 1917 in the shape that made its name. Perforated steel handguard, bayonet lug, sling swivels. Total production came to 1,024,700. Roughly 20,000 new-built and 5,000 converted guns were first war trench configuration, about 25,000 more for the second. Collector research, not a factory ledger. Nothing in it is stamped. A machined steel frame, an external hammer, a slide lock takedown that lets barrel and magazine tube come off for cleaning, all rated for a steady diet of heavy 12-gauge buckshot. 8 pounds and no rear sight at all. A bead, because the design range was the width of a trench. The German government protested formally in September 1918 that the weapon violated the Hague Convention, and the United States refused the protest. Pershing is reported to have answered that any German taken with a sawback bayonet or a flamethrower would be shot in return. Wording repeated everywhere and tied to no primary source. The Second War meant combat rather than storage. Issued beside the Model 12 for close work in the Pacific, then Korea and Vietnam. The only entry here that earned its rank without being asked to hit anything past 30 yards. That is why it stops at 20. Number 19, the Webley Mark VI. Close range was the whole premise of the British service revolver as well. The Mark VI was adopted on the 24th of May 1915 and built by Webley and Scott in Birmingham until 1923. Roughly 300,000 were made, about 280,000 during the First War. The totals disagree widely. It is a top break with simultaneous extraction. Open the action, and a star extractor throws all 6 empties clear at once, an arrangement for mud, cold, and gloved hands. Chambered in .455 Webley, it is among the most powerful top breaks ever made. The double-action lockwork was hand-fitted from Webley's commercial trade. The First War put it on officers, tank crews, airmen, and trench raiders. The Enfield No. 2 superseded it from 1932, and then shortage kept it in genuine front-line British and Commonwealth hands at Dunkirk, in North Africa, in Italy, and in Burma. Obsolete by doctrine, current by necessity, and not retired until 1963. An officer recorded as Lieutenant Blowers of the Tank Corps went back into a burning tank on the Somme for his driver and fought his way clear with his issue Mark VI, firing, he said afterward, over 100 rounds at nothing further off than 10 yards. The name rests on a single secondary account. All ruggedness, no marksmanship. A service revolver has no answer to the third question this list asks. Number 18, the Mosin-Nagant M91/30. That is a limit of the type. The next is a limit of the label. The M91/30 did not exist in the First World War. That war belongs to the M1891, adopted by Imperial Russia in 1891. The M91/30 is the 1930 modernization, round receiver, hooded front sight, the interwar step that carried the design into the Second War. Its virtue is ruggedness rather than refinement. A two-lug bolt machined from solid forgings. Tolerances left deliberately generous, so the action still turns packed with mud, sand, or frozen grease. 4 kilograms, 5-round integral magazine, a rear sight graduated for volley fire, and a reputation for being close to impossible to wear out. Production estimates run from 12.5 to 17.5 million. Inside a family, total near 37 million. The widest uncertainty figures in the record. Vasily Zaitsev of the 1047th Rifle Regiment killed roughly 225 Axis soldiers and officers between the 10th of November and the 17th of December 1942 at Stalingrad. As a shooter, it is a blunt instrument with a following. Commonly around 4.5 MOA as issued, taken under 1 MOA with trigger work and good ammunition. That is enthusiast testing, not an ordnance study. It is held here because the rifle that fought the Second War is not the rifle that fought the First. Number 17, the Madsen light machine gun, a rifle made in the tens. Of millions can at least be estimated. The Madsen cannot be counted at all. Denmark adopted it in 1902, named for Wilhelm Madsen, the Minister of War who championed it and then left development to others, and is generally credited as the first true light machine gun made in quantity anywhere. It stayed in production until 1955. No source consulted gives a confirmed total, and this list will not invent one. The action is recoil-operated, a hybrid of a falling block rifle and a machine gun. 9 kilograms, about 450 rounds per minute, 12 chamberings, sold to more than 30 nations, each with its own hand-fitted parts. It was built like a rifle, at a time when machine guns were built like machinery. Its first war was real but scattered, and never first line for any major power. Its second put roughly 3,500 Norwegian M22 guns into the fighting of April to June 1940. Crews are said to have called it Jomfru Madsen, the Virgin Madsen, for jamming in 6.5 millimeter, an attribution nobody has sourced firmly. Dutch East Indies service ran to 1942. German use was rear echelon. 2 axes satisfied, and the third untestable, since almost nobody alive can legally fire one. The idea was right, and the manufacturer was wrong. Proving it in ordinary infantry hands fell to a gun built in 6 figures on a British contract. Number 16, the Lewis gun. The Madsen was built like a rifle. The Lewis was built like a clock, and its own army refused it. Colonel Isaac Newton Lewis finished the design in 1911, and the United States Ordnance Department turned it down over friction with its chief of ordnance. He took it to England, approved for service on the 15th of October, 1915. Birmingham Small Arms built 145,397 in the First War alone. Sources differ by tens of thousands. The inside is clockwork, a gas action, a rotary bolt, a spiral return spring, a heavy machined receiver inside a finned aluminum cooling shroud, pans of 47 or 97 rounds, 28 pounds on the ground at 500 to 600 rounds per minute. On the night of the 2nd to 3rd of September 1916, 2nd Lieutenant William Leaf Robinson of the Royal Flying Corps emptied 2 drums into the airship SL-11 over Cuffley without effect. On a third pass from 500 feet below, he set it alight. The first airship brought down over Britain. The newspapers that week named the wrong ship. Its second war was the 58,983 refurbished guns already accounted for, home defense and anti-aircraft work, while the Bren took the infantry. Frontline once, storeroom after. Number 15. The Hotchkiss MLE1914. The Lewis has a part for every function. The Hotchkiss has 32 parts in the whole gun. No screws anywhere in it. No pins anywhere in it. No fastener a crew could drop in the dark and lose. Adopted in 1914 and built until 1920, it ran to over 65,000 guns, 47,000 of them to the French Army by 1918. One source, not cross-checked. The gas system came from Adolf Ottkolek von Augeza's 1893 patent, engineered into producible form by Laurence Binet and Henri Mercier. Instead of a water jacket, 5 heavy brass rings clamped around the barrel. 23.6 kilograms alone, near 50 with its tripod, firing 8 by 50 millimeter rimmed level at 450 to 600 rounds per minute. One source has crews holding roughly 120 aimed shots a minute almost indefinitely. A general claim, not an audited test. The United States bought 7,000 for the American Expeditionary Force. The career ran through the Second War and into Korea, Indochina, Algeria, and Vietnam. The character of that Second War service could not be established. The likely picture is garrison, fortification, and captured stock rather than frontline issue. What is certain is 32 parts, no fasteners, and a working life longer than most nations' small arms programs. Number 14, the Browning Automatic Rifle M1918. The Americans bought those French guns because they had almost nothing of their own. John Browning designed the answer in 1917 and demonstrated it before Congress at Congress Heights on the 27th of February that year. Production ran into the 1960s for 351,554 rifles, most of them the later M1918A2. The maker split is unsettled. The build makes the case and undercuts it in the same breath. A machined steel receiver, a 24-inch barrel, .30-06, a rear sight graduated to 1,500 yards, 16 pounds in the first pattern, and about 19 in the second. And then, from 1943, Armasteel malleable iron castings brought in deliberately to raise wartime output. A production shortcut in the middle of an overbuild argument, and it stays in the record. The two-war claim is true and badly lopsided. First combat came in September 1918, roughly 2 months before the armistice. The rifle did not become standard United States Army issue until 1938. No verified soldier's account attaches to it, and none will be supplied. Its case is the mechanism, a long-stroke gas action licensed into Belgian, Polish, Swedish, French, and Chinese service. Durable enough to hold its job through 2 more wars after the one it barely reached. Number 13, the Maxim PM M1910. 2 months of one war is the thinnest record so far. The next gun spent the whole of both. Adopted in 1910 and built at Tula until 1939, and again from 1941 to 1945. The total is unsettled. At least 176,000, some sources as high as 600,000, given here as a range. 3 names survive verification: Alexander Sokolov for the wheeled carriage, Ivan Koleshnikov for the 1915 Lightning, Semyon Vladimirov for the 1931 Mount. 2 others could not be confirmed. The gun body alone is 23.8 kilograms. On Sokolov's mount, the assembly comes to 62.66 kilograms. A machine gun that is towed. A steel water jacket replaced an earlier bronze one. It fires 7.62 by 54 millimeter, rimmed at about 600 rounds per minute. During the Winter War, the Soviets enlarged the filler cap so crews could pack the jacket with snow and ice, copying the modification from the Finnish Maxims they were fighting. Front line with the Imperial Russian Army through the First War, front line with the Red Army through the early and middle years of the Second. The SG-43 pushed it aside from the summer of 1943, while its own production ran to 1945. Displaced, not withdrawn. Number 12, the Maxim MG08. The Russian Maxim outlived its war. The German one outlived its usefulness. Hiram Maxim was born in Sangerville, Maine in 1840, apprenticed as a coach builder at 14, came to Britain in 1881 on electric lighting business and patented recoil, gas, and blowback operation between 1883 and 1885. His toggle-locked gun was adopted by Germany in 1908 and built by Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken and the Spandau and Erfurt arsenals to 1918. 72,000 MG08s, 130,000 of the lighter MG08/15, 69 kilograms complete, 26.5 of gun, 38.5 of sledge, a jacket of about 3.7 liters, iron sights to 2,000 meters, 450 to 500 rounds per minute. This carries the weakest Second War premise on the list. It stayed in the German inventory into the Second War, but by the end had been relegated to second-rate fortress units, a First War frontline weapon that lingered into the Second, not one that fought it. No dated endurance test and no verified battle account could be confirmed, and none is used. What remains is the object, a gun so heavy it needed a sledge. By 1945, it was so plainly finished that the army which built it had put it behind concrete. Number 11, the Vickers Mark I. The same toggle, turned upside down, produced the opposite outcome. Vickers limited inverted and lightened Maxim's action, adopted on the 26th of November 1912 as gun, machine, Mark I, Vickers, .303 inch. Output climbed from 266 guns in 1914 to 39,473 in 1918. No lifetime total was available. 25 to 30 pounds of gun on a 40 to 50 pound tripod, .303 British at 450 to 600 rounds per minute. Effective direct fire to 2,187 yards. On a dial sight, plunging fire onto a map reference out to 4,500 yards. Fire at a grid square rather than at a target. The endurance episode came at the start. 10 guns of the 100th Company, Machine Gun Corps, 12 hours at high wood on the 24th of August 1916, over 1 million rounds and roughly 100 barrels between them, no gun broken. It comes from 2 independent secondary histories and from the historian Ian Hogg. Not an audited ordnance record. Continuous British issue from 1912 to the 30th of March 1968. Front line in both wars. Last fired in anger in the Radfan during the Aden emergency. 56 years on one design. It ranks no higher only because nothing about it can be put against a modern rifle on a bench. Number 10, the Browning M1917 water-cooled machine gun. Browning did it without a toggle at all. The M1917 was standardized in 1917 from a patent filed in 1900 and a prototype built in 1910. 17 years between concept and combat gun, if the filing details hold. New England Westinghouse delivered 30,150 by the armistice, Remington about 12,000, Colt only about 600 of a 10,000 gun contract. The action is short recoil with a sliding vertical locking block, heavier to machine, simpler, and stronger to run. Gun, tripod, water, and ammunition come to about 103 pounds. The leaf sight is listed to roughly 5,500 yards with M1 ball. No crew would use that aimed. Every ordnance board of the era demanded it anyway. Its first war was a sliver. Roughly 1,200 guns reached the front in the last 2.5 months, and that figure is not firm. Its second was the whole of it. The M1917A won the American Standard water-cooled heavy machine gun at battalion level. On Guadalcanal in October 1942, Marine Sergeant Mitchell Page commanded a machine gun section that was, by the accounts, all that stood between his battalion and a Japanese breakthrough. Which models he had is not established. Decisive in one war, barely present in the other. Number 9, the Arisaka Type 38. Water-cooled guns end here. The next entry carries the most abused claim in military small arms. The Type 38 was adopted in 1905 under a commission headed by Colonel Arisaka Nariakira, much of the engineering credited to Major Kajiro Nambu under him, though that credit is disputed. Roughly 3,400,000 were built to 1942. Post-war analysis found receivers and bolts of plain high-carbon steel, roughly 8 to 9/10 of 1% carbon, comparable to SAE 1085. Nothing exotic. Strength came from process control and geometry, a 2-lug front-locking bolt, a 31.4-inch barrel. Now the claim, in the form the evidence supports. Julian Hatcher's post-war United States Ordnance destructive testing, in Hatcher's notebook, found Arisaka actions withstood proof and overload firing at least as well as, and by some accounts better than, the M1903 Springfield, the Lee Enfield, and the Mauser 98 beside them. One account has an overload blowing the barrel out, while the receiver stayed in specification. That is a comparison against a set of period military actions. It is not proof of the strongest bolt action ever made, and will not be presented as one. Early and mid-war rifles show fine machining and hand-fitting. 1944 and 45 production is visibly crude as industry collapsed. Overbuilt attaches to the early guns. It held frontline service in China from 1937 and across the Pacific to the surrender. The Type 99 built to replace it never displaced it. A mild 6.5 by 50 mm cartridge, a long sight radius, and the best result in the only destructive test anyone ever ran on, all of them at once. Number 8, the Krag-Jorgensen. The mechanism came from Ole Herman Johannes Krag, an officer at Norway's State Arms factory at Kongsberg, and Erik Jorgensen, a master gunsmith there. Norway adopted it in 1894 and built roughly 152,000 rifles. The reputation has to be stated precisely, because the obvious version is wrong. The Krag locks with a single forward lug and a guide rib, weaker than the dual lug Mausers standing above it on this same list. It shifted point of impact when the wood was wet. It is not the strongest action here. What it has is finish, hand-fitted Kongsberg machining, a side-loading magazine, and a bolt raceway. Shooters still call it the smoothest ever fitted to a service rifle. There is no first war. Norway was neutral from 1914 to 1918. The rifle was still standard on the 9th of April 1940. At Midskogen near Elverum that night, 20 to 30 Royal Guardsmen and Rifle Club volunteers turned back a German paratroop party sent to seize King Haakon and his cabinet. Under occupation, Kongsberg was ordered to build 13,000 more and delivered fewer than 4,000. The workforce slow-walked everyone. It ranks here on smoothness and on one night on one road. Not on strength. Number 7, the Colt M1911. 5 years of Army trials, set off by the .38 long Colt's failures in the Philippines, ended on the 29th of March 1911. By the armistice, Colt and Remington UMC had produced something over 643,000 pistols. That total comes from secondary accounts, not one ledger. The Second War added close to 1.88 million more. The largest share came from Remington Rand, a typewriter maker. The overbuild case is a manufacturing fact rather than a slogan. Colt has never used a cast frame or a cast slide in military specification production. Frames and slides were forged and machined from billet, parts hand-fitted, locking lug fit gauge checked on the floor by roving government inspectors, which is why parts from 3 separate factories interchanged. The clearances inside are generous on purpose. That is why it kept working full of sand. Standard American sidearm in both wars, and not replaced until 1985. On the third axis, it needs no qualifier. Accurized 1911 pattern pistols still dominate NRA precision bullseye. Service pattern guns hold between 1 1/3 and 2 inches at 25 yards with match ammunition. On published testing rather than an ordnance report. 115 years. And nobody has beaten it at its own job. Number 6, the Springfield M1903 Smith Corona, an office equipment company, built roughly 234,000 M1903A3s in 1943 and 44, long after Springfield and Rock Island had finished, inside a total above 3 million. The action is a Mauser M1893 with American additions, dual front locking lugs, a claw extractor, a large third safety lug bearing on the receiver bridge, and a leaf sight graduated to 2,700 yards. Volley fire doctrine. Not anything a man could hit. It carries the one metallurgical failure the Army documented against itself. Receivers below, roughly serial 800,000 at Springfield, and about 285,000 at Rock Island. That second cutoff comes down through secondary accounts, were single heat-treated, furnace temperature judged by eye, from the color of the steel. In the last 6 months of 1917, 11 rifles shattered, injuring 11 men, most of them in the eyes. Production halted, and an Army board fixed the serial cutoffs in December 1927. Double heat treatment came in from February 1918. Front line in both wars, the M1917's partner in France, then the scoped M1903A4 on Guadalcanal. It is still eligible in vintage military matches, low-number receivers excluded. The best of them is superb. The worst came apart in men's faces, and the Army's verdict on its own steel is permanent. Number 5. The Lee Enfield SMLE. James Paris Lee built his first gun at 12 out of an old horse pistol barrel. What he handed the British Army was a receiver machined from a forged billet, 2 rear locking lugs, needing a 60-degree bolt throw where the Mauser wanted 90, a striker cocking on closing rather than opening, and a 10-round magazine, when every other army issued 5. Adopted the 26th of January 1907, it was the fastest bolt action ever put into an infantry's hands. Roughly 3.8 million came out of Enfield, BSA, Lithgow, and Ishapur in the First War alone. A figure for the Mark III alone does not survive in the records. The peacetime standard was 15 aimed rounds a minute at 300 yards. The record, set around 1914 by Sergeant Instructor Snoxall at Hythe, was 38 in a single minute. Accounts differ on the width of the target. Its second war was not a reserve posting, front line for the Indian Army, for colonial regiments, for Australians and New Zealanders in North Africa, and the Pacific long after Britain had gone to the number 4. Ishapur built new ones past the end of the war, sights to 2,000 yards, and a rate of aimed fire no modern bolt rifle is built to match. It loses the top 4 only to rifles that were made better. Number 4, the Swedish Mauser M/96. This is the best steel on the list. Receivers and barrels forged from a Swedish nickel-vanadium copper alloy chosen for strength and corrosion resistance on a Mauser M1893 action with dual front lugs, assembled from serial matched hand-fitted parts. Inspection was individual, not statistical. A bore disc rejected any barrel over 6.56 millimeters. Adopted 1896, near 535,000 built, most at Carl Gustafs and Eskilstuna. Sweden was neutral in both wars, and its record splits in 2. The first half is mobilization. The M96 armed a Swedish army under arms through both conflicts, from the call-up of September 1939 to roughly 320,000 men after Germany took Norway. Something like 1 million conscripts passed through by 1945. The second half is combat, and the combat is not Swedish. About 77,000 were sold to Finland in 1939 and 40 and carried against the Soviets in the Winter War. On the third axis, it argues for itself. The 6.5 by 55 mm cartridge carried international full-bore biathlon until 1975. Surplus rifles on issue ammunition still group around an inch at 100 yards. One collector firing a Carl Gustafs, made in 1901, put 37/100ths of an inch on paper at 100 yards. It stands at 4 and no higher, because the war it fought was somebody else's. Number 3, the Schmidt-Rubin K11 and K31. This is the rifle promised at the start. The K11 was adopted in 1911. The K31 fielded from 1933 and built past 528,000, both made only at the Federal Arms Factory at Bern. Rudolf Schmidt drew the rifle. The cartridge came from Edward Rubin at Thun. Their straight-pull bolt locks on lugs at a rotating head. Across 3 successive models, those lugs migrated rearward, strengthening the action each time. Switzerland was neutral in both world wars, and neither rifle was ever fired at an enemy. Surviving 2 world wars means here 2 full mobilizations of a citizen army that was never invaded, the general call-up of August 1914, and the Aktivdienst of 1939 to 1945. 6 years of militiamen holding border positions to make invasion expensive enough not to be attempted. That is the whole service record. It is why the rifle is what it is, kept at readiness for 6 years by men who kept it at home. And by measurement, it is the best shooting rifle here. Machine rest testing of the K31 with issued GP11 ball at 300 meters under Switzerland's R50 standard gave dispersion of roughly 4 centimeters horizontally and 6 vertically, under 3/4 of a minute of angle. R50 is not an American extreme spread. It is still a competitor in the Feldschießen, the Swiss national 300-meter match, and in American vintage matches, where a 90-year-old carbine beats the Garands beside it. 2 axes answered without argument. The third answered by readiness instead of by combat. Number 2, the M1917 Enfield. Here is the part American histories tend to leave out. By the armistice, roughly 3 in 4 American Expeditionary Force riflemen were carrying this rifle, and not the Springfield. Britain adopted the pattern 1914 and had Winchester, Remington, and Eddystone build it in .303, rechambered to .30-06. As the M1917, the numbers went vertical, past 2,190,000 on the usual accounting, though one account runs higher. More in 2 years than Springfield managed in 3 decades, it is also the stronger rifle, a modified Mauser action, with twin forward lugs and the root of the bolt handle serving as an emergency third, in a receiver a pound heavier and 3 inches longer than the Springfield's, an aperture sight on the receiver close to the eye, faster and more precise than a barrel-mounted Leaf, over 6 rounds instead of 5. What alloy that receiver was and how it was treated, no source could confirm. The receiver bridge also made the pattern 14 the best sniper platform of the First War in many accounts. A scope sat directly over the bore, where SMLE conversions had to offset it. The Second War put it into American training and second-line duty. Then, after Dunkirk, roughly 615,000 rifles to the British Home Guard, with a red band painted around each stock. The stopgap turned out to be the stronger rifle, better sighted, and longer lived. Number 1, the Mauser Gewehr 98 and K 98K. Paul Mauser was born in Oberndorf am Neckar in 1838, the son of a workman at the Royal Rifle Factory there. The firm he founded with his brother Wilhelm swallowed that factory whole. What he arrived at, adopted on the 5th of April, 1898, is the pattern every other entry here is measured against. A large non-rotating claw extractor that takes the case rim the moment the round leaves the magazine and never lets go. 2 opposed locking lugs at the front of the bolt. A third safety lug behind them at the rear. The Gewehr 98 ran to 1918, with totals commonly given above 9 million. The K98K became Wehrmacht standard on the 21st of June 1935, with totals cited from 10 to 14.5 million. Sources disagree at both ends. 1 bolt design, 2 rifles, probably past 20 million guns. The copying began long before the war that made the name. The Czechoslovak VZ-24, the Belgian FN models, the Yugoslav M24, the Polish WZ-29, the whole Turkish line. The Wehrmacht's own acceptance standard required 3 shots of 5 inside a rectangle, 8 centimeters by 12 at 100 meters, from lines producing rifles by the million. And it never ended. The 98 pattern claw extractor action is the basis of premium custom and dangerous game rifles built today. Mauser resumed making M98s in 1999, sold at a premium as heritage. That is the whole ranking in one object.